If you are an Arabic-speaking Greek Orthodox going to a French school, it makes you deeply skeptical if you have to listen to three different accounts of the Crusades, one from the Muslim side, one from the Greek side, and one from the Catholic side. Nassim Nicholas Taleb. In many ways, the order of crusading knights known as the Teutonic Knights has been largely misunderstood. Perhaps even more misunderstood than the Crusades. For one thing, since the Teutonic Knights are German in origin, many have falsely equated the Teutonic Order with the German nationalism that arose in the 20th century. However, for those who see similarities, it is always an inconvenient truth to point out that when Hitler took over Austria, one of the first things he did was disband the last vestiges of the Teutonic Order. The Teutonic Knights could be known as the other Crusaders, or perhaps even the Crusaders with a side mission. Because unlike their peers, the Knights Hospitaller and the Knights Templar, who were primarily famous for waging war against the powers of Islam, the Teutonic Knights were given a crusade of another kind. They were sent to do battle with the pagans of Europe. However, the Teutonic Knights began their ministry not as a fighting force, but as caretakers of the sick. Their origins stem back to 1118, when the Hospital of St. Mary of the Germans was established in the city of Jerusalem. In the 13th century, the Holy Roman Emperor, Frederick II, actively worked with the Teutonic Order. He regarded the Teutonic Knights as the main representatives of the Holy Roman Empire's military might in the Holy Land. By the time the Teutonic Knights came into their own, Jerusalem was lost, and the Crusaders had nearly been driven out of the region, with only a much smaller base of operations in the northwestern Levant. As hostile forces were constantly squeezing the Crusader kingdom, the future for the Crusader foothold in the Holy Land continued to look bleak. Many a good knight was stuck in a seemingly intractable quagmire and began to look towards secondary missions outside of the region. They found a new home in Eastern Europe and were soon given a new task. They would no longer battle Muslims in faraway lands, but rather infidels and heretics who were much closer to home. The Teutonic Knights would establish outposts in the wild fringes of civilization right in the backyard of the pagan strongholds of Eastern Europe. At the dawning of the 13th century, due to the seismic shifts taking place in the Holy Land, the next best opportunity for the budding order of knights came from the King of Hungary. Andrew II requested the aid of an able fighting force in the Balkan frontiers of Transylvania in Eastern Europe. The knights obliged and successfully pushed back the Cumans. But as far as the King of Hungary was concerned, they began to get just a little bit too comfortable. And once it seemed that they were trying to set up their base of operations in Transylvania, Andrew II rose against them. With the backing of the Pope, they were able to build up several strong fortresses and even encourage other Germans to settle in the region. Eventually, Andrew II rallied his homegrown troops and forced the knights to leave. The Teutonic Knights were now without a castle where they could hang their helmets. Soon enough, however, international intrigue in Eastern Europe would provide them with new territory to lay claim to. Poland had been trying to convert the pagans of Prussia by force. With the Pope's blessing, the Teutonic Knights and the forces of Duke Conrad of Mazovia waged war on the Prussians. The Teutonic Knights mercilessly slaughtered any Prussians who refused to convert to Christianity. The pagan Prussians performed literal human sacrifices on Teutonic Knights whenever and wherever they captured them. As the Teutonic Knights drove out the enemy, they established fortresses on the newly conquered territory. The Polish powers were certainly glad that the pagan Prussians were no longer raiding their lands. But now another Christian, yet largely alien culture was taking root. In a virtual repeat of what had transpired in Hungary, Polish leaders began to wish that the Teutonic Knights and their hangers-on had somewhere else to gather. Another monastic order, the Livonian Brothers of the Sword, or as they were later called, the Livonian Knights, was having an increasingly difficult time against the pagan forces of neighboring Lithuania. They had previously waged war against Estonia and Latvia, which was lumped together as Livonia in those days. After some unsuccessful bouts in Lithuania, the Livonian Knights were so thoroughly destroyed that it was decided that the remnants would be absorbed into the Teutonic Knights as the Livonian Order. They would remain a distinct branch of the Teutonic Knights, but they would be ultimately under the charge of the Teutonic Grand Master. The Pope gave his blessing for a renewed crusade against the Lithuanians, and the following year the Teutonic Knights were redeployed to the front lines of Livonia. Teutonic Knights were soon calling their new base of operation St. Mary's Land, in homage to their origins in the Levant as the Hospital of St. Mary. Livonia was not a center of paganism but the land of Mother Mary, and as such, it was quite an attractive place for Christian settlement. And as their power base grew, the Teutonic Knights began to push farther and farther east. This eastward push soon led to the famous engagement known as the Battle on the Ice, in which the Teutonic Knights faced off against a group of Russian warriors led by a Novgorod prince by the name of Alexander Nevsky. The official stance of the Vatican was that Orthodox Christians of the East were in error. In truth, if the Teutonic Knights could defeat these Orthodox Christians and forcefully convert them to Catholicism, church officials most likely would have approved of their efforts. The Russians were not going to be taken down easily, though. The Battle on the Ice would prove a spectacular defeat for the Teutonic Knights. The fact that the Russians beat the Knights would prove quite pivotal, since it would make both the Teutonic Order and their backers in the Vatican think twice before making any further inroads in the East. It also affected the overall conversion effort of pagans in the region, leading to uprisings of both native Estonians and Prussians, as they sensed the Knights' weakness from their sudden reversals. The might of Orthodox Russia would prove to be the great speed bump to the Teutonic advance. The Teutonic war machine would inevitably begin to slow down from here on out. As conflicts popped up across Poland and Prussia, the Teutonic Knights suffered intensely. They barely had any of their original territory left under their control. It is said that all but 3 of their fortresses had been compromised by Prussian attacks. It looked pretty bleak for the Teutonic Knights, but they were eventually able to rally themselves and take the fight back to their attackers. Proving that they were indeed skilled in siege warfare, the Knights were able to topple the fortresses of their enemies. After a short period of peace, hostilities flared up once again in 1260, leading to a renewed Prussian revolt against the Teutonic Knights. After a defeat by Samogitians and Lithuanians, the Knights decided to work with the infantry of native Prussians and Curonians. However, the Curonians backstabbed the Knights. Things got worse when the pagan Prussians of Pomerania decided to strike the fallen Knights, managing to deliver decisive blows. This string of heavy defeats nearly caused the Teutonic Order to collapse. But as had been their habit throughout their history, they were once again able to seize victory from the jaws of defeat. The Pope's reinforcements and subsequent Prussian losses helped to stem the tide, but ultimately the fighting would not cease until 1283, when the last of the rebels were rooted out. Ironically, toward the end of the conflict, when the Prussian resistance had been reduced to little more than guerrilla fighting in the wilderness, the Teutonic Knights employed Prussian mercenaries to do their dirty work for them. But now, another front called them. The Crusades were at a crucial point, and the Mamluk Empire was a worthy foe. The Teutonic Knights, the Knights Templar, and the Knights Hospitaller were called to help defend Acre, the Crusaders' base in the Holy Land. After the fall of Acre, the Teutonic Knights fled and strove to consolidate their gains in Eastern Europe. On the Eastern Front, the secular powers of Poland, as well as the papacy, were now aligning themselves to move against the Teutonic Knights. The Teutonic Knights had killed many civilians in Danzig, which had forced the Pope to authorize an investigation. The Teutonic Knights now put all of their focus on battling their enemies on the Lithuanian-Russian frontier, while simultaneously being wary of potential Polish aggression while their backs were turned. The Lithuanians, realizing the severity of the situation, established relations with the Tatars of Eastern Europe, who in turn established a link with the Mongolian warlord successors of Genghis Khan. None of this helped the Lithuanians in the end, as the Teutonic Knights decisively established their might. The arrival of the Black Plague halted the proceedings for a few years. When conflicts resumed, the Lithuanians, allied with the Samogitians, Ruthenians, and some Tatars, proved too much for the Knights. However, they could not capitalize on their success. The Grand Duke Jogaila gave in to Christian demands and was baptized. The fact that Lithuania was now a Christian nation ended the main mission of the Teutonic Knights in the Baltic region. The old Prussians, within the domain of the Teutonic Knights, once again rose in rebellion against the Knights. The Teutonic Knights suspected that the Lithuanians were behind the disturbance and prepared to strike out against Lithuania. The next thing the Knights knew, the Poles were readying to go to war against them if they dared to engage in hostilities with Lithuania. These latest rumblings would lead to an all-out war between the Teutonic Knights and the Polish-Lithuanian Union in 1409. The Polish-Lithuanian alliance struck at the Knights with success. When the forces collided at Grunwald on July 15, 1410, the Polish and Lithuanian forces offered a fatal blow to the Knights. They fled and holed up at Marienburg when the Livonian Knights arrived at their help. After putting down Lithuanian militants, a large force of Hungarian and German mercenaries also answered the call for help and unleashed their fury upon the Polish troops, decimating their ranks. What seemed to be a glorious victory for the Polish-Lithuanian Union was quickly becoming one of its worst defeats. The Teutonic Knights had barely survived, but the colossal defeat at Grunwald had sealed their fate. The Knights continued on a course of steady decline. With their military might laid to ashes at the Battle of Grunwald, they could not keep up with the assault of the Poles. During the 13 Years' War in the mid-15th century, the order was defeated, and they continued to cede regions. In the 16th century, they relocated to the Prussian city of Königsberg. After they lost Prussia, the order lost its territory in Livonia as well. Russia, Sweden, and Poland-Lithuania took it. As the years passed, the Teutonic Order was secularized in Prussia and Livonia. The disintegration of their territories and possessions continued, and in 1809, Napoleon dissolved the order and distributed its lands. After the Napoleonic Wars, the order had a handful of territories in Austria, which it was allowed to keep under the watchful eye of the Habsburgs. After the First World War and the fall of the Habsburg dynasty, the order was revived as an ecclesiastical institution. Later, Hitler abolished the order entirely, but as always, it came back. It was revived once again as a charitable organization. To this day, it continues to exist in this form. To learn more about who were the Teutonic Knights, check out our book, The Teutonic Knights, a captivating guide to the Catholic military order and their role in the Crusades and impact in Europe during the Middle Age. It's available as an ebook, paperback, and audiobook. Also, grab your free mythology bundle ebook while they're still available. All links are in the description. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button and subscribe for more videos like this.